Welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games and giant thunder lizards. Solosaurus is sponsored by Game Castle, where the games are great and the memories are even better. Visit them at shop.gamecastle.com, that's castle with a K, and enter Solosaurus10 for 10% off your order, or click the link in the description. Solosaurus is sponsored by Game Castle, where the games are great and the memories are even better. Visit them at shop.gamecastle.com, that's castle with a K, and enter Solosaurus10 for 10% off your order, or click the link in the description. And now, here's your host, stomping through the underbrush, Michael Eckenfels.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Solosaurus. I'm your host, Michael Eckenfels, and today we are going to talk about Resident Evil 2, the board game, a zombie board game, and I should say right up front that there will be discussions of zombie-related things, especially in the components section. We're going to get into a little bit of that. Now, you might think this is going to be gruesome, and it might be to an extent. So I'm going to say this right now. I know some of you like to listen to this with your children in the room as you're doing other things. I am not going to dwell on this, though I will have to discuss it when we get to the components section. So fair warning, if we get to that point, I'm going to mention it again just to remind you. If you want to skip ahead, no problem. I understand. But again, I'm going to not focus on that. I've got to mention it because it's part of the design, but it's not something I'm just going to dwell on throughout the whole podcast. So I just wanted you to know that right offhand. So let's talk Solo Squared news. Solo Squared, it sounds weird to say that out loud. But of course I'm meaning Solosaurus news and Solo news, Solo board gaming news. So the Solosaurus news, let's start with that because I might go on, and there's timestamps so you can skip it if you want to. So the first thing, of course, and you're probably aware of this, I released an episode of a new concept called Solosaurus Plays. And this is where I am narrating gameplay, and I'm also talking about the game. And originally I envisioned it as being this old-time radio show type thing where you've got characters talking and they've got special effects going on, this kind of thing. And it didn't work that way. It kind of evolved in a different manner. I had started it under the name Roll of Thunder Podcast because I thought, this is going to be dramatic. This is going to be awesome. And it just kind of, it didn't fall quite right for me. So, and also, I've talked about this before, it just made more sense to just fold it into the Solosaurus podcast itself and just do them as separate episodes. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to design new thumbnails as well. They're going to be the same overall design, the cute Triceratops. I love it. I'm not getting rid of that. I'm just going to redo it a little bit so that the icons on the thumbnails for the actual episodes will stand out. So at a glance, you'll be able to see a yellow background one will be a regular Solosaurus episode. A purple background one will be a Solosaurus Plays episode. And simple as that. If you listen on YouTube, you're going to see the thumbnail or the widescreen image easily. It'll stand out. If you listen on Libsyn, it'll stand out. I think that those images are pushed to the other podcast sites, so that should work. Now that you know that. And knowing is half the battle. So suggestions are welcome for that. I've started it with a game called Rock Band, which is a solo RPG that you've probably never heard of. You can get it on Drive. I had to think about that. I almost said Solitaire Times. It's on Drive-Thru RPG. It's THRU, Drive-Thru RPG. If you go there, search for Rock Band, it should come right up. And it's right now, I think it's still on sale for $2.95. It's super cheap. And it's about 60 pages of content, if I remember right. It's really a good game if you like this kind of thing. If you just want something quick and simple, you need a little bit of record keeping, so you're going to need to print some documents out, some sheets, or you can create your own, I suppose, on a computer if you want to do that. But you'll be doing a little bit of writing and a little bit of creativity, and I just love how it flows and how it generates a story. So that's my concept for that, and I'm thinking I might be doing games that are not as known or as mainstream, I should say, as other games. Like, for example, today's title. I don't know. I might still do narrative style games. If I do a review on something, I might do that. But any narration, any suggestions you have, tell me. Hit me at the Facebook page. Write me at solosauruspodcast@gmail.com. Let me know. I think overall my comfort is increasing with doing this solo. I actually originally I think I might have been a little nervous just because Martin wasn't around, and talking about things has helped me tremendously. And that's one thing about this hobby that I absolutely adore. It's that we can all talk about games and not inject ridiculousness into it. We keep things out that are not pertinent to the subject. We don't talk about politics. We don't talk about religion. We don't go into other things that are technically taboo to discuss with other people in this day and age, which is a real shame, actually. But the thing is about it is just we're able to talk about this and discuss it and love it and really have no judgments. I mean, I can sit here and pontificate for an hour on any topic solo gaming wise. For me, it sounds like I'm just kind of going off track completely, but you guys, I appreciate you listening absolutely to this, because I know there's so many board game podcasts out there, but we all have this voice and we just love sharing, and that's what it's all about, really. So that's something I am very grateful for. So thank you for this. Let's talk about solo news now. Let me get to my channel here, my page, my webpage for solotairetimes.net. I am just going into the Watch Your Back week of November 12th to 18th. I don't see a more updated version of it, though they do have some other articles here. So I'm just going to kind of go through this and talk to you about what stands out to me. So the first thing that I'm seeing here that looks kind of cool is, well, there's a lot of cool things here actually, but the first thing is 1793 Patriots and Traitors. It is a 1 to 5 player area control game which takes place in the years following the French Revolution. You play as either a revolutionary, a moderate, or a conservative, each with their own agenda. This game is card-driven and has cooperative elements as well, since the players must make sure the country is not invaded by Austria or Prussia. It is launching on GameFound on November 14th, so as of this recording, it's December 3rd, so this should be out there, actually. The personal opinion of Solitaire Times is this may appeal to coin game fans, COIN, that's counterinsurgency. I've talked about that before. Athena goes on to say, I don't really enjoy playing multiple sides, although the theme is certainly interesting. And that's a good observation to make, actually, for any coin game, because, well, solo games, we're playing all sides, right? We're playing our side, and then we're playing the bad guy's side. And sometimes the game system does a really good job of taking over that role and just hitting you with unexpected things, whereas you're actually, as opposed to, I should say, making decisions for another player or another side, which you do. I'm such a child, sorry. Which you do in any coin game or any multi-handed game, really. But coin games are a little bit different, though, because they actually do have flowcharts to manage what a quote-unquote bot would do in certain situations. But the way to get best familiar with those, because those flowcharts differ with each side, the best thing to do is to play them yourself multi-handed. So you get your first coin game, you sit down, you play all sides yourself, you just put yourself into that role, you try to do what you think that faction would want to do, and move on to the next turn, the next faction, and you do the same thing. In this particular case, I don't know if there's actually flowcharts for it, but it does say 1 to 5, so it's got a solo play component to it, which is kind of cool. And the period also interests me as well. There's so many things in the modern 20th century conflict-wise that you can trace back to the Napoleonic Wars, or back to the regicide that went on in France when the French Revolution occurred and the king was overthrown. That made a lot of people in Europe extremely nervous, because they were all monarchies, basically. You couldn't have these rabble-rousers rising up against their king and deposing him and putting him away, so to speak. And they just didn't want their people to think, that's a good idea. Let's try doing that to our king. So that's kind of a fascinating period of history to me. So if you're interested in that, I'd say go for it too. It did mention a few things that sound familiar. There's another game called, Prime Minister. There we go. I've got it sitting on the shelf right here next to me. You'd think I would know what I'm trying to remember here. It had, when it talked about factions being conservatives and moderates and revolutionaries, there's similar concepts in that game, I believe. And Prime Minister, by the way, is a GMT game, and it just came out from the P500, which I was backing for a while. And it takes place during Queen Victoria's time in the hundreds, mid 1800s. I can't remember offhand. I'm terrible. That's why I got this game, actually, because I'm interested in the period and learning more about it. And it's not entirely one that is totally familiar with me. So anyway, there we go. So that is 1793 Patriots and Traitors. Let me just click the link and see who it is by. Publisher is Sound of Drums. Artist is Mark von Marshall. Okay, I know Mark. I've met him. We used to work together when we were at Matrix Games a long time ago. He is a very talented artist, so that'll be a good game. I can't wait to check that one out. All right, so next, the author says, Back to Silliness with Deceased, a Zombicide game. Silliness in a Zombicide game? Wow, I can't imagine. I'm being facetious, of course. Yet another installment in the popular Zombicide universe. And that's a good thing to read, because this is going to be a point that I want to make later. Yet another installment in the popular Zombicide universe, this time with superheroes. The ones who haven't turned into zombies fight against the heroes who have, and the other zombie hordes. It is a 1 to 6 player cooperative game, and your goal is to fulfill objectives, rescue citizens, and save humanity from the anti-life virus. It is launching on Kickstarter November 14th. So there you go. Another one that's launched 2 weeks ago, at least. Personal opinion, no. Again, a good point to make, because that's another thing I want to talk about when we get into the review about these zombie games. It's not really a belief. It's just going to be an observation, I think. So we'll get to that when we get to that. So let's see what else we have. So there's quite a few other interesting ones, and our pattern usually is to just cover 3. I think I'm going to look at Wish, W-I-S-H. It is a 1 to 4 player competitive action selection game in which players are djinns, D-J-I-N-N-S, trying to fulfill the most wishes. Now, I spelled it, the article did not, just so you heard me clearly enough, basically genies. But I think there's probably a big difference between the two. I don't know. I don't mean to just lump them together, but that's my perception, and I could be totally wrong. So it sounds interesting in that you're playing a djinn and you're trying to grant wishes. That's kind of interesting to me. Gameplay is asymmetrical and revolves around the completions of wish cards, construction of monuments, and fulfillment of a djinn's destiny. There is no information about the solo mode yet. It is launching on Kickstarter on November 14th. Well, that worries a little bit, just because 1 to 4 player, okay, it's got solo to it, but no info on a solo mode. So that means it's in development or is not a priority, perhaps. I wonder if it's just going to be a tacked on thing. It's going to be a multiplayer game with a little section at the back that says solo play. Look at this section. All the rules apply except bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. I don't know. I could be wrong. The author continues. The game is vibrant and colorful thanks to Mihajlo. I am so sorry. Thanks to Mihajlo Dimitrevsky, I think is the name. I'm sure I'm doing a terrible service to that name. I apologize. To this person's illustration ability. Since there is no info on solo, cannot say anything more. Exactly. So that, my perception, I could be totally wrong. It could be a very robust solo mode. It could be completely solo at first, and it just has multiplayer as add-on information. But in this case, I do not know. It still sounds like a very promising idea and not something I've heard of before. So there we go. So let's get into the review of Resident Evil 2, the board game. I want to thank Game Castle for providing this game to me for review purposes. It's part of the sponsorship deal. We get free games from them and cover them and give them publicity. So please go visit Game Castle's website, visit their shop, and if you want, you can use Solosaurus 10, all one phrase, at checkout as your discount code to get 10% off your deal. And some of those proceeds actually go to Solosaurus for covering our expenses for podcast costs and sound effect costs for the other side of things and whatever else I can do, because I'm actually wanting to get a new microphone as soon as I can, just because this one I have is 8 years old. It's a great microphone. It's a Yeti Blue USB. It's really good, but it's getting long in the tooth, and I want to see if I can find something better that's a little more directional, so my voice is probably better. I don't know. So anyway, that is Game Castle. Thank you guys for providing this game to me for this review. So let's talk a little bit more about just the game in general. But first I want to talk about horror in board games versus movies, as well as zombies as a topic. Now, if you're like me, and there's a few of you out there, you love zombie stuff and you can't get enough of it. I have plenty of zombie-side stuff. I actually, admittedly, have not played it a lot. I have played it some. I did play Marvel Zombies quite a bit earlier this year when it came out. Was it earlier this year or was it last year? See, that's the sad thing. I cannot even remember. But that was a fun game. I really enjoyed it, and it's quick, and it's fast, and it's fun to play. Plus Marvel Heroes. I really liked the graphic novel series. I can't remember when that came out. I learned about it after the fact, but it was very entertaining. It's a really good story. If you've never read it before and you're interested in superheroes and zombies, go check it out. But I think there might be a bit of an overload at a certain point. Some people are just probably zombied out, like the author said, no, to that. How far do you go? This is Marvel's already done it. Marvel's done a gigantic all-in package. I just got the base game, not the full add-ons like the Galactus Mini, which is not so mini. It's more like 18 inches tall, I think. That was an unbelievable amount of money. But people pay for it and buy it, and that's great. You love the hobby, you love superheroes, and you love them being zombies even more. That whole part of Galactus being part of the Marvel Zombie storyline was fantastic and overwhelming. So, again, check it out if you can. But I wonder if we're getting too far into things with that. Like superhero movie fatigue is supposedly a thing, and I don't know if that's indicative of people just getting sick of the stories or just getting tired of other things being inserted into the movie. I don't know. That's not my place to say, but it's more, are we just getting so much we're just getting overloaded and we're just tired of it? I don't know. Me? No, I'm not. I'll just say that right off the bat. So I like this game because it does some really cool things. Zombie Side I like because it's very simple and straightforward. This one does a little bit more of a twist to the whole zombie thing. You might be something you're familiar with from other games, and it might be something that you are aware of. So me, I'm not. So I'm going to be really geeky and how cool is this kind of a thing. But horror in general in board games, it totally hits different from other genres. I mean, for movies, I should say. So you're watching a horror movie, that's one thing, versus actually playing a board game about that same subject. Case in point, Alien, the original movie from 1979. That is a true horror classic, and especially sci-fi horror. It started this whole genre with sci-fi horror and it even redefined horror in general. And it was such a fantastic movie. It wasn't really all that gory either. It didn't have a lot of that in it. It did, obviously. It had more than enough in just one scene to last the entire movie, or to just occupy your mind for months afterward, after the first time you saw it. But compare that to Alien: Fate of the Nostromo, the board game. That's very much a family-oriented game around a subject that is not a family subject, at least in my opinion. It's the alien, the xenomorph, as it's called, is not a friendly creature. It's not a happy-go-lucky guy. This shouldn't be a game of tag, which it essentially is. We covered that. Martin and I did cover that in an earlier episode. It's not a bad game, though. It's fun, and you can just change it if you want, right? House rule it if it's not something you like. Just change it. And I did that, and I had a lot more fun with it. But still, I'm just saying that obviously a movie is going to hit differently from a board game. Do you still have that, and this is a question for you to think about, that feeling of tenseness when you play a board game as opposed to watching a movie? I mean, even a movie you've seen multiple times, like Alien, I've seen it. Aliens, I've seen it many times, both of them. It still is something that fascinates me, and I can still rewatch it and rewatch it and rewatch it, and it still gives me the heebie-jeebies. So does that work for you too? Or do you see a game and go, ugh, okay, this is not going to hit the same? You watch horror movies for a reason. Do you play horror games for the same reason? It's a totally different thing. It's a tactile or tactile, whatever, interaction that you have with a board game, which you don't have with a movie. So that's one thing. There's also the fact that if you're playing Friday the 13th or Texas Chainsaw Massacre or even this Saw board game that's coming out soon, is it something that is going to have the same, let's say, effects in the board game that you would see on the screen? Obviously not. But there are certain ways that they can communicate this feeling through the components, through the rules, through just the presentation. So it can actually hit the same, I think, and it can provide the same amount of tension if it's done correctly. So I think it's a really good attempt by publishers to try to create and recreate these moments that we have in movies in board games. It's really interesting to me how these get translated. So let's look at an overview of the game. So we are looking at a 1 to 4 player cooperative game. It is very challenging in the cooperative way of things. So I will get into that more, but it's not competitive at all. It's just makes it very difficult for you to coordinate in some scenarios. There are 8 total scenarios. There are 2 that are intro scenarios that the first one just has very basic setup and rules, and then it builds on that after you play it, and then it builds on it for the third one, and then you're off to the races pretty much with the remaining 6 scenarios, I think it is. So each of these has a different goal. The first scenario, you're trying to escape the streets and get to the police station, the Raccoon City Police Department. And one thing about Resident Evil I've always found amusing is this hyper-violent, oppressive fear of zombies chasing you through the streets. They just want to do one thing when they catch you, and Raccoon City. It just sounds like this cutesy thing that just doesn't make any sense to me, but people love it. That's great. I just always thought some of the names were kind of odd. That just takes me totally out of the tension to hear Raccoon City. Okay, I just can't. I can't. But that's just me. I don't know. I just ignore it and move on. So that's a cool thing about the game is that the first couple of scenarios build on each other and add additional rules. So it's not just trying to throw you into the deep end like some games do. This is something other board games do. The first one that comes to mind is one called Enemy Coast Ahead: The Doolittle Raid. That is a game by GMT. It's a solo game where you are recreating the Doolittle Raid. And if you're not familiar with that, really quickly, it was a B-24 bomber raid on Tokyo in early 1942. It was meant more of a morale thing than to try to actually do damage to Japanese infrastructure in World War II. They launched off of carriers, which was totally unexpected. A lot of the crew didn't make it home. It was a very brave thing to go off and try to do, and they did very little damage, but the morale impact was gigantic, and this game recreates this. But it starts small, so it starts first off with showing you to do the actual raid over Tokyo. Then it builds it up a little bit more, and adds a little bit more, and adds a little bit more. So it goes through about 8 of these steps, actually, before you're actually playing the full game, and you're playing it from the beginning onward. But it's interesting to me that it goes backwards. It starts at the very end of the game, which is the actual raid. Then it adds on the resolution, and then it adds on, coming up to the raid, then the Trans-Pacific crossing, and then the training involved and all this stuff. So this isn't quite that detailed. My point is, that it is cool in that it holds your hand a little bit. It drives you to learn a little bit more, and it gives it to you in chunks, which is an excellent learning procedure. It's fantastic, and that's something we strive for actually in instructional design, to just make them digestible in one chunk. And instead of giving you a 60-page rule book and saying, here, have fun, this is a lot different. So the first couple of scenarios, as I said, their goals are pretty simple. All of these scenarios have different end goals, and I believe you lose at any of them by not completing the objectives. Obviously, like getting into the Raccoon City Police Department in the first scenario, everybody has to get in there. And I think it starts you by playing 2 characters in that scenario. And if one of you gets offed, I should say, by the zombies, then you do not win, because that person can't get into the police department if they're just, lying out there on the street somewhere and unable to move. So it changes from scenario to scenario, but the overall thing is everybody has to survive. If somebody gets offed, then they are they lose the scenario, and you have to restart it. Now, are they linked? The scenarios are somewhat tied together in that they tell a story along the way. So one builds on the next. It's story-wise, though you can play them all separately. The the rules that are added for the full scenario are are kind of overwhelming in that it makes the game very challenging. There's a lot to it, and I'll get into that here once you get that. But it's very easy to play. It's not difficult. It's just when you're looking at the setup, you're like, oh man, how are we going to win this? This is insane. This looks very difficult. But it's actually really approachable and really easy to get into. Let's talk components. And this is something I pointed out earlier on in the episode, that we are going to have some things to talk about here that might not be entirely appropriate for children. And I probably mentioned a few words already, so apologies. But I did, like I said, want to give the warning up front just in case you have little ones listening. So the interesting thing about the game, I found when you open the box, it has a insert that warns you that there is blood and gore in the game. And it's not actual, like on the board. I shouldn't say that. It's not like in the acts themselves of fighting zombies. It's in the components. It's in the book. It's in the map tiles. And in a way, it's in the mini sculptures as well. So if monsters freak you out, you probably don't want to play this game just for that reason. The sculpts are actually pretty good and pretty detailed. But the book, the manuals, they have, let's say, blood stains. There's no way to get around that word. It just is. It's throughout the book, and not actual ones, obviously, just printed ones, handprints, zombie imagery, that kind of a thing. So if this is not something that appeals to you, you're not going to want to look at it, because it can be a little disturbing. It's not bad. I'm not saying, oh, I just can't handle it. I'm fine with it. It's just, wow, that's a lot. Wow. Flip the page. Wow. Flip the page. Wow. Okay. But it's very thematic in that regard. I mean, a zombie game is not about picking posies and dancing through the tulips or anything like that. It's not about building electric cars. It's about zombies, and it's about violence, and it's about offing zombies that want to off you. So there's going to be that depiction, and it kind of sets the mindset of Resident Evil 2, which is obviously it's not Pac-Man. It's a different kind of story. It's a different kind of thing, and it's prevalent in the work. So again, if this is a game you're interested in, and you got a 3-year-old in the house, say, I mean, it's totally up to you whether you like to show them this or not. I just would say it's probably up to you. But I want to point it out just for that reason. It's important to mention up front. That said, it's really cool. If you're into this kind of genre, the design it's wow. I can't believe they did this on every single page kind of a thing, but it's pretty cool in that regard if you're into this kind of thing. I just want to say that up front, just in case somebody is a little squeamish. It's everywhere. Like I said, in the book, in the map tiles, and in some of the counters as well. But that said, the quality is pretty good. The map tiles are thick, but the only thing I don't like about them is they're a little small. But that is something that actually might work for them. If you don't have a large table space, they are going to work fine, I think, for you. But there's some scenarios where you have to set up 2 separate floors, multiple levels, and so you're going to have room for that. So if they were any bigger, they probably would be too big for my table. As it is, I think everything just barely fit. It's a little hard to keep track of all that as a solo player, but it really, having the little bit smaller is good in that regard. But the other side of the coin is it's hard to put a lot of pieces into each space. So very many times you're going to have a hero in a space with 2 other zombies. There are actually rules to how zombie pieces fit into spaces. There's some that are 1 square size. There are some that are 2 square size. And then there's a big one that's a 4 square size. Guess who that is? The boss? Perhaps. It can be a little weird when you're trying to fit everything into 1 square. And that happens sometimes. You just are thinking everything's clear, and then suddenly you've got a bunch of zombies on top of you. It just happens, and that's kind of a fun part of the game, actually, that you don't see coming, and it really can overwhelm you quickly, just like any good zombie movie would portray, or zombie series for that matter. The counters are good in that regard. They're nice and thick. They are well designed. Again, there's depiction of blood and such on some of these, so your mileage may vary. I think they're fine for the theme. Of course, they're perfect for the theme. And the minis themselves, as I said, good sculpts. I want to say they're 28 millimeter. They're on the smallish side. I have some 32 millimeter figures that are a little bit bigger, so I'm guessing they're 28s. I could be wrong, but they're still kind of small. But they're still very detailed, and I like them a lot. I like the variety of zombie pieces too. Zombies, just general everyday zombies. There's about 20, I think. I could look in the rulebook actually and tell you exactly how many there are. There are 12. I'm sorry. There are 12 regular zombie figures, and they're all different poses. Some of them are the same pose, and they are in the same space in the insert in the game. So I kind of like having a variety. So when I'm picking out 2 zombies, I don't want to pick out the same 2. I want to pick out one and then a different looking one, right? I don't want them to be exactly the same. That's just me. I don't mind having the same pieces on the board. It's just in the same space. Like if 2 of them spawn, I want 2 different ones. So there's also 4 zombie dogs, which can be disturbing, I guess. But they're really cool sculpts, and they're different sculpts too. So that's nice. There's 2 what are called lickers. These have very long tongues and are very dangerous. Then there's 2 larger boss type creatures, a G mutant and a Birkin stage 3. So, and then there's 4 heroes as well, 4 characters. They have, and if you're familiar with the lore, you'll recognize these names: Leon S. Kennedy, Claire Redfield, Ada Wong, and Robert Kendo. That said, they're all different sculpts, and they're really cool. They all have different powers and abilities, so that's kind of nice too. When you're playing the game, it tells you to choose however many heroes you want. It doesn't matter, 1 to 4. When you're playing it solo, I played it with 2 a lot, because that seemed to be about the right balance. I'll get into why when we get into gameplay, but I think overall they're pretty well-designed characters. Some of them don't have the best powers, I don't think. They weren't useful to me anyway, but I can see where they could be at some point. Other than that, we can talk about the rules. Now, I've already said that it has a good structure to it because it builds slowly on itself, and I love that. The rules are clear, they're sharp, they're concise. That's amazing. They are great at holding your hand. As I said, they get you through the first part, and within a few pages, you're looking at it, the first scenario, and it's like, wow. Okay, I can play this now. I don't have to spend 3 hours poring over a rule book, trying to figure out the nuances, trying to figure out the if-then statements, trying to figure out how this works together. I can just jump in and learn these basics and then build on that for the next scenario. And it even kind of does that. It goes into the next section. Okay, you played the first scenario. Now we're going to add some more rules to it. And it's, here we go. Let's learn this. This is how this works. This is how this works. And this is why this next scenario is doing this. And you just kind of are led into it. And then the next scenario pops up and you set it up and play it. I love that about it. It makes it quick. The game, like right now I have it set up on my dining room table. It's taking up quite a bit of room because I've got the boxes. I've got everything spread out. I've got the cards organized. I've got my own card organizers and cup holders to keep everything together. It's all over the place. So it's kind of wide, and putting it back together into the box, that's kind of a challenge, but it's, you know, it's like anything worth doing. Setup, I think, is quick. Putting it back down is going to take a little bit more time. Not a lot. It's not like Gloomhaven. I mean, you're not putting away 5,000 pieces or minis. It's good in that regard. So, and I kind of went off on a tangent again when I was talking about rules. Anyway, sorry about that. The rules, I can't really say much about them other than what I've said. They're good. They're concise. They're clear, which is great. And the scenario book is good too, because it kind of gets you into a mindset of the story. It tells you a little bit of a background, ties into the last scenario in a way. But again, not so much that you are out of place by playing scenarios out of order. So you can go play scenario 7 if you want. 7A, I think it's called. And jump to 4A. I mean, you can do it however you want to do it. It does try to keep it tied together loosely so that it makes more sense as a game. So I love that about the documentation. Very good. So let's get into gameplay now. This is pretty simple and straightforward. Everything is organized into turns. Each player takes 1 turn and then goes to the next turn, which is the next player, and the next player, and so on. Each turn is divided into 3 phases. You have the action phase, then the reaction phase, and then the tension phase. Now, in the action phase, that's where your player, does their thing. They do they have 4 actions total that they can spend. Think of them as action points. You can move, you can open or close doors, you can search, you can trade, you can use an item, or you can attack. The cool thing that I just will mention now about this is if you attack, that means you have a zombie in range and in your line of sight, the zombies will react to you. I mentioned player turns, I didn't mention zombie turns, because this does something a little bit different in that all of this is baked into each player's turn sequence. So you as a player choose whatever character goes first. If you're playing it solo and playing with multiple heroes, you just, okay, which one am I going to go first with? Choose them, do your actions, and if you make an attack, the zombies can react to you. So this can mean bad things if they're like right on top of you. It can also mean inconsequential things, like they just move one space closer to you. It just depends on the zombie that can see you and hear you. I'll get into that a little bit more later. But then you also have the reaction phase, which is after your turn is taken for that player. So it can be a little confusing when you're thinking, okay, wait a second. I've got my actions, I attack, the zombies react, and then we have a reaction phase where the zombies react again. Yes. Yes, that's what happens. That's my perception of it anyway. So in your action phase, you attack, they can react, and then in the reaction phase, they can react again. Reaction just means they move towards you. If they can't attack you, if they can attack you, they attack you. They don't do both. They can do one or the other. So, and then how do they do that exactly? It's on a really cool concept where you have connected tiles or doors that are open or closed. Excuse me. A connected tile is tiles that are, of course, connected, and they are contiguous. So a lot of these tiles are separated by doors. If a door is open, it's considered connected. So if a door between two tiles, I should say, is open, those two tiles are considered connected. If the door is closed, it's not. So if you are in a hallway, say, with a zombie, and you attack that zombie by firing at it or using a knife, you're making noise, which is where this reaction thing comes from. Then in the reaction phase, any other zombies that are connected to that tile will move towards you. So if there's an open door and there's zombies in that other room, they will move towards you. If the door is closed, though, they will not. So this is important because this can enter into your strategy as you play the game. Once you've done all the zombie reactions during the reaction phase for that player turn, then you go to the tension phase, which is where you draw a card from a tension deck. Now, these are mostly all clear, but there's several yellow-themed cards which can be dangerous and red-themed ones which are very, very dangerous. So these will add zombies to the game. They will add markers to your characters. They will add situations that you have to overcome in order to proceed, or you might end your entire turn. It's very up in the air, and it adds tension to the game. I mean, as it builds too as the scenarios go. So you play the first scenario, that tension deck is not very large. The second scenario, it's much larger. And then from there, it's pretty much the same size. It adds different cards here and there, different situations, different dangers. So it kind of ramps you up in that regard. It doesn't just toss you in the deep end, like I said. And I kind of like that. So it's interesting to me that this whole reaction thing, and it's hard to picture that, it's like I take my turn, then the zombies take their turn, but it's not always, it doesn't work that way. You take your turn, and then if you do something like make noise by attacking, they come after you, and then they come after you again in the next phase. So each player does that. So that said, the number of players you choose can really impact this game. I don't think the tension deck is a measure of time. It might be. I didn't play all the scenarios. I played most of them, and I played several of them several times. But the gameplay is pretty much the same in that regard. And if the tension deck runs out of cards, you just reshuffle it and keep going. Simple as that. Actually, there is a scenario where the tension deck does act as a timer. It is let's see if I can find it. One of the last scenarios. So you take the tension deck, you split it in half, and then there's a self-destruct card that goes into the second half, gets shuffled in there. Then you put the two decks together. So somewhere at the point after the halfway point of that deck, you're going to run into that card, and there's going to be problems for you. I don't want to get into great details about it, but it acts as a timer in that regard. So not all the scenarios do that, though. Many of them are just when you run out, reshuffle it and keep going until you either finish the objective or you don't. Somebody gets taken out by the zombie horde. The actions you have, the 4 actions, as I said, you have move, you have attack, you have these other things. Moving is 1 action per space. So that's something to keep in mind. You don't get to move a certain number of movement points per move action. You get 1 movement point, and you can move diagonally as long as you're not crossing across a red line, which is a wall. I like the diagonal movement thing. That's really important, and something it's a point of contrition with some players when it comes to movement. So that's kind of a cool thing to do. The other thing about combat too, and is line of sight. You need to be able to see what you're shooting at if you have a gun, or you have to be on top of it if you're using a knife. There's no real range limit, I don't think, except to the zombies. Like regular zombies, they have to be on your space to attack you. The lickers, I believe, only need to be a space away from you to do it. And the zombie, of course, the bosses have other powers as well. So you need to be careful and cognizant of that at all times. And that can enter into your movement. I might as well just talk about strategy here at this point, I guess, because sometimes you have zombies that are dangerous, very dangerous, like the lickers. I played one scenario where I, through terrible die rolls, burned through most of my ammo for the handguns and ran across the licker, which is very dangerous in that it takes 3 hits to kill it. And hits are not a guaranteed thing. When you attack, you roll a die, and you can actually roll more than 1 die if you want to spend more bullets. The handgun allows you to do this. Different weapons have different abilities, but the handgun is pretty much a stable. You can fire 1 shot, roll 1 die, fire 2 shots, roll 2, fire 3 shots, roll 3, and that's the max you can do. And you can burn through a 15-round clip really quick, especially when you're rolling terribly. You're looking for a certain result, which is a double hit on the die, which will cause 1 hit to it. If you get a single hit on the die, that's actually a pushback when it comes to the handgun. So again, all different weapons do different things. You're trying to get these results to off these zombies, obviously, but sometimes you sit there, you attack, you miss, they react by moving towards you, you attack, you miss, they react again. So you can see how dangerous this can be. This is why this tension decision in how many shots you want to make if you have that ability with the weapon. Do I want to burn through my clip? Do I want to have a better chance of getting this guy off me? What do I do? And it's even more of a thing when you're in the same space with 2 zombies and you need to attack or try to evade, which is another thing you can do. Stepping out of the space, you have to make a roll. It's worse when there's more than 1 zombie in that space. You have to get a certain result in order to succeed. There's a lot of tension there. But sometimes movement is your best option rather than attacking. And back to that licker, it's I had to maneuver. I had ran back into a room. It chased me down the hall, and then I maneuvered around it and closed the door, which the game says you can do. And I thought that's a really good idea, because the first time I played that scenario, I just got hammered. I just couldn't get through it. The second time, again, I burned through my ammo through terrible die rolls, and I just trapped the thing in the room. So I was able to not have to deal with it. I only had like 3 rounds left in my pistol, and I still had a long way to go. So that's the thing. You got to be really careful about going through your ammo early on in a scenario, which that was the first hallway. So, I had a long way to go. And the game actually, I set it up with 2 players, and they start on opposite ends of the map. One starts on one end of the first floor. The other starts on the opposite end of the second floor. And you both have to get to this certain room, which is difficult because you had to find keys. And another option for your action is, as I said, search, which means there's little counters on the game board labeled A and B, which signify a certain card. And at the scenario start, it tells you draw these A cards, draw these B cards, shuffle the A cards together, shuffle the B cards together, set them up by the board. These are your items. So you go to a space where there's an A or a B, you take that counter off the board, and then you draw that card, and that's the item you get. And you're trying to find those things because, again, you need the keys sometimes to progress through the scenario. You want to find other things like healing items or extra rounds for your handgun. Very important. There's very few ammo, very little ammo, I should say, in the game. Another reason to be very careful. You're probably going to be using your knife quite often, which is not the greatest weapon, but everybody starts with one. Let's see. There's other more powerful weapons you can find, but not always. There's a shotgun, which is very good. There's a bow gun, which is very good. There's a magnum, which is really good. But again, ammo is very scarce. You don't just get Rambo levels of ammo to deal with the horde. You have to be very smart about how you expend all of this. So really, in any game, you're needing to prioritize item draws. You need to find those items, and usually they're tucked away in spaces that are very dangerous, or very areas that are very dangerous. Very areas. They're always tucked away in spots where there's multiple zombies or in very dangerous zones. One of the things that the scenario builds you up to are called tile encounter levels. So you look at the board as it's set up. I wish there were markers to do this, so I didn't have to keep referring back to the map to see. But when you enter into a new space on a new tile, and a tile is a map piece, so it could be a square room, it could be a L-shaped hallway, it could be a small room, it could be a small hallway. A tile is a tile, and stepping onto one, look at the map reference and see if it's color coded. And if it is, then you have to roll on a certain table when you enter that first space to see what happens. So that could be more zombies, it could be really bad things, it could be no effect. It just depends on what you roll. Usually, more often than not, it just spawns more zombies, and so you're going to be very careful about that. when you get ready to move on to one of these tiles, especially one of the red ones, there's two types. There's a yellow and then a red. Of course, the red is much more dangerous. You walk up to a space that's just before a door that opens into a red area. Even if you have just a couple of actions left, you spend one to open the door, and then you have one action left. It's usually not a good idea to spend that last action to move into a red zone and roll and see what happens, and then have zombies appear, and then they get their reaction phase so they can come after you. So you need to be aware of that. You need to be aware of zombie spawn points as well. They have them printed on the map, and that's usually where they will appear when the game calls for them to do so. So you got to be very aware of that as well. It's also good to cooperate and have your characters cooperate. If you're playing it solo, of course they are. There's no hidden agendas. There's no individual player success goals. You all win together or you lose together. As I said, if one character gets offed, that's it. Everybody loses the game. So playing it solo, if one of your players gets off, or one of your characters gets off, then that's it. You're done. You have to start it over again. But that'll teach you too that you probably did something wrong, like burn through your ammo too quick or just kind of rush through things, and that's never a good thing. But running, as I said, movement is always a good option, and I took advantage of it. It kind of took a while to sink into me. I kept thinking as I was playing this that I just had to take every single zombie out. You don't. You have objectives in the game that are related to other things, like get a certain object or go to a certain room and to continue to the next scenario, which, again, it's not tied. It's just a victory of that scenario. But taking out zombies really is optional. You don't have to, but sometimes you have no choice. Like you're in a hallway, one space hallway, you've got 2 or 3 of them in front of you. You have to attack them unless you really think you're good at being agile and getting past them. You have to be really lucky on your die rolls to do that. If you don't, then if you're not lucky, then they get to free attack on you. And each character only has 5 levels of health. You start at a level called fine, then it goes down to not fine, and then you can get unconscious, which I think after the 5th hit or the 6th hit, after the last hit, I should say, you have 5 hits, then you have one more, you're unconscious. You have to be revived, and you could do that, but if you get a character there quick enough to give them a healing spray, if you've got one. Again, it can be very challenging, especially when the scenario starts you on opposite sides of the map, and you have to be very conservative and very careful. And as a solo player, you're of course wanting to bring them together because then they can cover each other. Then they can be much more aggressive and be able to meet challenges much easier when you got 2 characters facing off against a room full of zombies as opposed to 1. It's much easier. So I love that it does that. I love that it actually makes things challenging. It gives you a chance to have a single character succeed by finding cool items and then coming together at some point, hopefully in the scenario, to adventure and finish. You can even trade these items too. That's another action you can take. So you don't always hoard them off. You can say, this character needs bullets, so I'm going to give this card to the other one and when you're in the same space. So, it helps make the game a little bit easier to progress through. So overall, it's a fun game. I wish there were more scenarios, but I know there are expansions for it. So that's an option. If you like it, if you get this and you like it, then you have that chance to do more with it. But what it has in the box, it's really good content, especially if you love zombie games. It has an unusual system, as I said. I like it. The components are good, but again, be mindful of what it looks like. You can probably see the rulebook online somewhere, so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. The map counters even are kind of gross. I mean, they don't bother me. I think they're kind of cool, but you know, I'm kind of weird in that regard, I guess. But they might off put some people. It overall is a very good design. It looks good, and I like the feel of pushing the counters around. I like how the minis look. The characters are all gray molds, and then the monsters are all reddish kind of molds, so they stand out really well. I wish that the item counters were standing out a little bit more. They're basically square pieces that glint. They have this glint thing on them that looks like they're shining, but they still kind of blend into the background of the map tile, because the map tiles are very busy, and that really doesn't help it shine. I think if I had a choice, I would use some kind of 3D counter perhaps, or a chip or something that would stand out better to represent that. I didn't have many problems with it. I'm just like, I have a fear of overlooking them or forgetting about them, because again, items are very important in this game. So there's that. It plays smoothly once you have the hang of it, but it's easy to get a hang of it, which is nice. The challenge of not burning through your ammo is big, and so that's where these items come in handy, because ammo is almost always one of the items. Again, there's very limited supply. There's just a lot of ways to approach the game too, and there's a lot of decisions you can make. Now, it might not seem that way. You're looking at the hallway. You have to go down this hallway to get to this point to get this item, and you want to do that and that, but there's different ways to approach it. Sometimes you're just in this choke point where you don't have a choice but to go straight through this hallway, but you sometimes have a choice. Do I go around this room, or do I go into this room? Do I want to ignore those items, or do I want to try to get them? Do I need them? Do I have what I need? Do I have a key to get through this certain door? That kind of a thing. Once you get it, though, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to avoid this. Or, hey, I've got a licker zombie that I'm facing off against. Do I want to fight it, or do I just want to try to lure it into this room? Because they're not very quick. Can I do that within a few turns and not waste a lot of time and get it in here, and then I can run around it like I did and close the door? I was so proud of myself in doing that. That was so cool. Like, hey, I didn't have to put a bullet into it, or a lot of bullets, because I did fire on it. I did roll 3 shots on it the first time I attacked it, and I missed every single shot. And so it moved a space closer to me in reaction. So I was like, okay, this is not working. I'm running away. It gives you moments like that that are kind of funny and fun and enjoyable. And I love that about the game. All of this makes it an outstanding game. But when it comes to stomp of approval, I think it's too, I don't want to say niche. It is. I mean, it's a zombie game that's very niche, but it's very zombie game related. I have to think of this in terms of, is this a game good enough for everyone? Would I recommend it to everyone? Is it a game that's very general or very appealing across the board? And I would say no, just because my perception is not everybody is into zombie games. So that just in and of itself, I don't think I can recommend it for a stomp, because that's what a stomp is. It's about having a mass kind of appeal. Do I think everybody would love this game, or everybody should play this game? If you're a zombie fan, yes. If you're not, then don't. Simple as that. So I would say no, stomp of approval. It doesn't mean I don't like the game. I love it. I really do. Yeah, I will get it back to my table again and again, I am sure, because it's so easy to set up and get into. It's just, again, it's not something that I think will appeal to everybody. Folks, this wraps up episode 93 of the Solosaurus podcast. I'd like to thank again our sponsor Game Castle, as well as give a shout out to Meeples and Beyond for both supporting this channel, especially Game Castle for being the main sponsor, of course, with our Solosaurus 10 discount code. Go over there, do it. If you need a board game, check them out, see what their prices are like, and buy something. Use your code though. Be sure to use your code Solosaurus 10, and that actually gets us a little bit of money to help keep the channel going. Really appreciate it. We appreciate your time and listening. We're proud, as always, to be part of Dice Tower. Thankful to Eric Summerer for doing our intro piece as well. You can check us out on Facebook. As usual, head over to Solosaurus on Facebook. ask me questions, engage with the community there, as well as Instagram. I'm getting better about Instagram and posting pictures to it. Also, you can email me at solosauruspodcast@gmail.com. You can even go to Solosaurus on BGG. It's under gaming-related podcasts and blogs, and then, of course, Solosaurus. And then if you need a micro badge, if you want a Solosaurus micro badge, we were generously donated a lot of Geek Gold, as I've mentioned before. Go over to me on Solosaurus. My name there is TexScripter, TexScripter, and feel free to geek mail me. Ask me for a badge. I will be glad to send you the gold. I think it's 8 or 9, and that would be great. I would love to get more of those out there in the BGG interwebs. So please do reach out to me there. Or you can just email me at solosauruspodcast@gmail.com and tell me your BGG handle, and I will be glad to send you that gold. As always, I'm Michael Eckenfels, and as always, I'm very grateful for you listening to the podcast. I appreciate it, and we will see you in the next episode.